Today I'm writing the code for an expert advisor that is based on a strategy often called the Bollinger Band Squeeze Strategy or the Bollinger Squeeze Strategy. So this will use the Bollinger Band, and I'm looking for consolidation in the bands and then a breakout. So it's basically a breakout strategy. What I'll be looking for is an area like this where the Bollinger Bands have contracted. And I'm defining this area. You can see here the lowest point of the Bollinger Band within this zone is there. And then the highest point is back here. So what I'm doing is looking for a range where the minimum on the Bollinger Bands to the maximum is within a defined range. And then I want that to occur over a given period. So I'll also be specifying a length of time where the Bollinger Bands must be within that range. And then what I'm looking for is the breakout in either direction from that and trade with that breakout. And I'll be taking the entry at this point. So if I can just extend the bottom of this range out, you can see that this candle actually went past the range but didn't close. So I'm looking for a candle to close outside that range. And so this is the first candle that has closed outside the range, and I'll take the trade here. The price did move up again then to here and then went with that breakout trend. And I'll be looking for a 1-to-1 take profit stop loss. So if I extend this out a little further, my stop loss would have been here. And I'll be looking at a 1-to-1 for a take profit somewhere around here. So that would have given me a tidy profit on this particular trade. So to do this, we need certain factors inside the code. I need to set up an input for the size of this range. I need an input for the duration where the Bollinger must remain within the range. And of course, I need to set the parameters for the Bollinger Band and then the general settings for taking the trade. So now I'm in the MetaTrader 5 editor, and I'll be following a standard pattern that I use for writing this code. And I have here the files showing in my Bollinger Squeeze Expert. I have the MQ4 and the MQ5 file so that I can compile this for MetaTrader 4 or 5, and those are just shells. And then they include this Bollinger Squeeze.mqh file, which has most of the body of the Expert Advisor. I also have two small files, which we'll see in a moment. There's default inputs and framework there just to give me a single place where I can put some common information. And then expert is where most of the logic of this expert advisor will happen, and that will be included by the Bollinger Squeeze. This does use the frameworks, the Orchard frameworks, and it uses framework version 3.02, which you can see here is inside include Orchard frameworks. And I will leave a link in the description and on screen where you can see videos about the framework and where you can find the framework to download from Git. So starting with the Bollinger Squeeze.mq5, and this is the file that you would use in the MetaTrader 5 editor and to compile for a MetaTrader 5 expert. I've skipped over the comments at the beginning. Then I have this hash include Bollinger Squeeze.mqh, which is the file that contains the common logic for MetaTrader 4 and 5. And then some standard property statements, the copyright, link, version, and description. And for these, I have some macros, which I'm also defining in this Bollinger Squeeze.mqh so that I don't have to repeat them in the MQ5 and the MQ4 file. Go to the Bollinger Squeeze MQ4, and it's almost the same. I've again skipped over the comments at the beginning. I've just added this hash property strict, which is needed for MetaTrader 4 to compile with the new version compiler. When I say new, it's been around for quite some time, but to maintain compatibility with older code, this was introduced at around build 600 to indicate which version of compiler you want to use. But then the property statements are the same, and the include statement is the same for that Bollinger Squeeze.mqh. Now, just before I do look at the Bollinger Squeeze MQH, I'll show you these two framework and default inputs. Framework is a simple file that I include in other files, and it simply points me at a given version of the framework using this hash include, and then in this case I'm loading framework 3.02. The reason I've put this in a separate file is that if I upgrade the framework version that I want to use in the future, I just need to change this one file, and because this is included in the other files, everything will suddenly use the new version framework that I specify here. It just saves me having to search through all of the other files to find it. Now I know this is a simple expert and I really just have the expert and the Bollinger Squeeze.mqh to worry about, but this is a practice that I use in larger projects as well. Then the default inputs, this is something new that I've just introduced, and mainly because I seem to have these particular inputs, the input volume, trade comment and magic, always. And so I've just put this into a simple file that I can then copy between projects for these tutorials. And my standards for this will be the input volume is 0, and that way if you simply compile this and try to run, it won't work, because you shouldn't be just running these out of the box. You should be using these as code examples. And then the input trade comment and magic, these are also macros, the app comment and the app magic, and they are macros that will be defined in the Bollinger Squeeze.mqh file. And so we'll go straight to that Bollinger Squeeze.mqh file now. All right, again, I've just skipped over the comments at the beginning. You can see the defines I was talking about, the copyright, link, version, description, comment, and magic. And by having these definitions here, it makes it much easier for me to make a single change, and it applies in both the MQ5 and the MQ4. Now, if you're wondering, I have these property statements in the MQ5 and the MQ4 file. These will affect the information that shows up on that first screen you get when you load an expert advisor onto your chart. The screen that shows the description of the expert, the version, and so on. If I don't have these property statements in the actual MQ5, or for MetaTrader 4 in the MQ4 file, then the values don't appear on that screen. It would be tempting to say I'll simply put these statements into this MQH file and just do that once, but then I don't get these values appearing on screen. And then at the beginning of the Bollinger Squeeze, as I said, include framework.mqh, and that way this will be using that same framework version. And if I upgrade the version of the framework that I want to use later, I can simply change that one framework.mqh file. MQH file, the Bollinger Squeeze.mqh file, is effectively the event handler. So the standard functions like OnTick, OnInit, etc. are event handlers that are called by your MetaTrader platform. And I'm putting those into this Bollinger Squeeze.mqh, and then the logic for running will be inside the expert.mqh file. Let's start with the inputs though in the Bollinger Squeeze.mqh. Now the standard inputs that I said I would need, I need the standards for Bollinger Bands, which would be the period, the deviations, and the applied price. So I'm using the standards here for Bollinger Bands, 20 periods, 2 standard deviations, and based on the closing price. And then the other inputs I need are to specify that range that I'm looking for. And I've said here the squeeze period is 10 bars, and the squeeze range points is 200 points. So I'm simply looking for the highest of the Bollinger Band and the lowest of the Bollinger Band to be within 200 points for a period of at least 10 bars, and that will say that I'm in a range. And then here is the default inputs that I've included, so that I don't need to keep repeating that in every tutorial I create. The expert.mqh file actually has all of the logic for this expert, so I need to include that file and then set up an object of type C expert. And that's simple. I just include expert.mqh, and then I declare type C expert pointer, and I'm calling that expert. The onInit function is where I create an object of type C expert, so expert equals new C expert, and here I'm setting all of the inputs, and I've broken them up here basically depending on the type of input they are. So the specifications for the Bollinger Bands first, the specifications for the squeeze range, and then my standard values of the volume, trade comment, and magic. All of those being passed into the C expert constructor, and that gives me the expert object. And then I'm calling a method expert.onInit on the expert object. That will take care of any validation. I don't actually have a lot of validation in this expert, but as a standard I do that, and it takes care of validation of the inputs, making sure that expert's ready to run. And this returns a value that is the same thing you would expect to normally return from the onInit function. For OnDinit, all I need to do is delete the expert object, and that's a good practice to tidy up. You can get away with not doing it, but you will use up memory if you repeatedly close without deleting objects. And then to actually execute the expert object, or to execute the trade logic in that expert object, I have a method inside the expert called OnTick, so I simply call expert.onTick inside the OnTick event handler here. And so that completes the Bollinger Squeeze.mqh. As you can see, very little in here. All I really need to do is create the expert, delete it when I'm finished, and call the OnTick in the OnTick event handler. And so all of the logic then resides inside the expert class. So now I've moved on to the expert.mqh. As I said, this is where the logic for the expert advisor happens. I've skipped over the comments at the beginning again, and there is this hash include framework.mqh. Now, in case you're wondering, MetaTrader won't include the same file twice. It includes that framework.mqh the first time it finds it when it's compiling, and any further references are simply ignored. So there's no problem with including the same file more than once, or there's no problem with having this include statement more than once. That file will still only be included once. So the first thing, this is a class. My expert is a class, and so I've defined class CExpert, public inheritance from CExpert base, and CExpert base is in the framework. Now I have no private methods or members. I do have some in protected, and here I have hashifdef MQL4 because I'm dealing with Bollinger Bands, and in MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5 the constants used for the upper and lower bands have changed names. So in MetaTrader 5 they are called upper band and lower band, where in MetaTrader 4 they were called mode upper and mode lower. But so that I can write the code once and just use one of these terms, I have these define statements. So I'm defining upper band as mode upper if I'm compiling for MetaTrader 4, and that's the hashifdef __ MQL4 __, and the compiler only includes this block of code if I am compiling MetaTrader 4. This int m handle, that's a handle to the indicator. That's also only used in MetaTrader 5, but it doesn't hurt me to simply declare the handle in both MetaTrader 4 and 5. It's just not used in MetaTrader 4. And then the key values for the bands, the integer bands period, double deviation, and applied price, the bands applied price, and these will be set in the constructor for the class. And then I have the squeeze period, the squeeze range, and then some values that I need for working with that range. M range high will be the highest value within the range, M range low will be the lowest value, and M in range is simply an indicator to say that a range has been found. If you go back to the diagram, remember that I didn't trade as soon as the Bollinger Band broke the range. I traded when a candle broke the range, so I need to remember that a range exists until a candle closes outside that range. Loop is my standard function called by the framework, and it's basically called from the OnTick event handler of the expert base. I have bands high and bands low, which will respectively give me the highest value and the lowest value of bands within a specified range. And then I have this bands extremum, which basically gets the highest and the lowest values from either the upper or lower band. And you'll see how it's used when we get to the bands high and bands low functions. And then to finish off the class definition, I just have the constructor in public, and that just takes the same arguments you would expect: the bands period, deviation, applied price, the squeeze period and range points, and then the volume, trade comment, and magic for trading. And then I have the destructor. Moving on to the code, and the first thing I have is the constructor CExpert : CExpert. That's the constructor for it. Here are all the arguments, the same arguments we had in the declaration. First thing I'm doing with this CExpert base, I'm calling the constructor for the base class, and that only takes the arguments of volume, trade comment, and magic number, because all the rest of these values are specific to this particular strategy. So I pass those to the expert base, and that takes care of initializing these three values for me. The next statements are simply applying these inputs to the function to the internal member variables. So m bands period equals bands period, and so on down through deviation applied price squeeze period. Because the squeeze range has been specified in points, I'm going to convert that with this points to double function to give me a squeeze range in the price of that particular chart. This points to double is a function also inside the framework in the common base class. And then I set m in range to false, because when I begin, I'm just simply saying there is no range at the moment. Now here's another if def, this time for MQL5. MQL5 and MQL4 handle indicators differently. In MetaTrader 5, you declare a handle to an indicator and pass the arguments, and then MetaTrader 5 takes care of keeping that value up to date. MetaTrader 4, it's a different call at the time you want to get the values from the indicator. So if we're compiling for MQL5, then mHandle equals iBands, which is the function for a Bollinger Band indicator. The arguments to that are the symbol, M symbol, time frame, and then the inputs for the Bollinger Band itself. There's the period, a shift, which I'm not using, so I'm setting that to 0, deviation, and the applied price. So that sets up a handle to a Bollinger Band indicator. If that's unsuccessful, then mHandle will contain the value invalid handle. So I test then if mHandle is equal to invalid handle, set the minit result to init failed, and return. And that minit result is important because if you remember, well, let's look back here at Bollinger Squeeze. I call this expert.onInit. It will be returning that value. So setting minit result to init failed is the method of returning an expert failure on startup. And then I return. So if mHandle is invalid handle, we get out early. And if we get through to this point, then just minit result equals init succeeded. And now the destructor for MQL5. So the standard destructor cexpert : cexpert. And this is only required if we are in MQL5 indicator release. So MetaTrader 4, as I said, doesn't have this handle for an indicator. MetaTrader 5 does. And just as you would delete objects you've created, you need to call indicator release to free up the memory if you're no longer using that indicator. So indicator release and the handle. And then most of the work for the expert happens in the loop function, which is called by the OnTick function of the expert base class. It's a void because the OnTick is void itself. First thing I'm testing is if not new bar return, because this will only trade on a new bar. I said I'm looking for a bar to close outside the range, and new bar is the only time where I can detect that the previous bar has just closed. New bar is also set up by the parent class, the expert base, so I know that that's already been set before I get into this function. The next thing I want to do is make sure that I'm not trading if I already have a trade open. So I'm calling a recount function, which is also in expert base, and all that does is look for trades that are for this symbol and this magic number. And if I find those trades, then it returns this value in mcount. So if mcount is greater than 0, it means I have some trades open, and then I'll simply return. In looking for a range, I need to get the highest Bollinger Band value and the lowest Bollinger Band value within that defined range period. So I'm going to call two functions now, the bands high and bands low. We'll see those soon, but I'm simply capturing those. So I've got a high and a low, which tells me the highest of the Bollinger Band upper in that specified period, and low will be the lowest of the Bollinger Bands lower in that period. And now I need to handle the event where I'm actually inside a range, where a range has occurred. So this test, if high minus low is less than or equal to the squeeze range. So that tells me that the difference between the highest Bollinger Band high and the lowest Bollinger Band low over the specified number of periods is within this range. So a range has formed. So if that's true, then I simply say m in range is equal to true. It says that I'm inside a range. I'm only toggling this to on. You'll note that I don't have a statement here to say if high minus low is greater than the squeeze range, then turn this off. Once a range has occurred, then I simply want to say I have a range and wait for the price to break out of that range. I don't actually care if the Bollinger Bands expand and the range ends, I'm just looking for the first breakout after a range has occurred. And then I'm also capturing the range high and the range low. So range high, because the Bollinger Bands might actually be narrower than my specified range, I want to set my range high and low based on the specified range. So I'm looking for the midpoint of that difference between high and low, and then I'm taking the range, half of the range above that and half of the range below that. So the midpoint of this high and low will be the center of the range. So M range high will be low plus high plus the squeeze range divided by 2. And that will give me the price, which is the middle of the Bollinger Bands plus half of the specified range. M range low is low plus high, which is the midpoint, minus squeeze range, and then divide by 2. So now with that, I have a range high and range low, which is equally spaced around the midpoint of this high of the Bollinger Bands and the low of the Bollinger Bands. Now, if I am in a range, whether it's just been set up here or whether it already exists, I want to handle trading conditions. So if I am inside a range, then I'm getting the close price, which is just I close symbol time frame, comma 1, so the close price from the bar that has just closed. If the close price is then above the high of the range, now I have a bar that's closed above the range, so breakout to the top, then I execute a buy with the trade.buy. Now trade is a standard object which has been declared inside the expert base, and it is of type ctrade custom, which is also defined inside the framework. And the arguments to trade buy are order size, symbol, opening price, which I can specify as 0 because buy will take care of finding the appropriate opening price for a buy trade. Range low is my stop loss, so the opposite side of the range, and then close plus squeeze range sets a take profit that is the same distance away from the close above as range low is below. Now there is going to be some difference because I'm specifying a price here. By the time the trade is executed, there will be some slippage, so the entry price may not be exactly between range low and this specified take profit. And then just the trade comment. Once I've executed a trade, or at least attempted to execute a trade, then I simply say in range is equal to false. And then I have the opposite condition here. If close is less than range low, then I'm breaking out to the bottom, trade.sell, order size, symbol, 0 for the price. But in this case, the stop loss is the range high, and the take profit is the close minus the squeeze range. Now this close plus squeeze range may not be an exact one-to-one with the range low. If the close is significantly above the range high, then the opening price, which I'm specifying here as 0, will be somewhere close to the close, but may not be exact with slippage. But if close is well above the range high, then the difference between the opening price for this trade and the range low could be much greater than close plus squeeze range. If you really wanted a true one-to-one, then you would still specify the stop loss here as the range low, but the take profit would be the close price plus, let me just make the change here, then it would be close plus close minus range low. So the difference between the close and the range low added to the close, and that's assuming that we can open a trade at or close to the close with the slippage. And then we have the case where we've broken out to the bottom, close minus range low, break out to the bottom, trade.sell, order size, symbol, still specifying 0 as the price. In this case though, the stop loss is at the range high and the take profit close minus squeeze range. And again, if I wanted to make this exactly a one-to-one, assuming that the close may be significantly below the range low, so this would be close minus M range high minus close. So that will give me a true one-to-one from this close price to either the range high or the take profit. And then trade comment. And again, M in range equals false once I attempt to make this trade. And then that completes the loop function. So within the loop, I've detected whether a range exists, set the M in range value to true if it does, set the range high and low. If I'm inside a range and the price is broken out, then I've executed a trade, and as soon as I execute a trade, I turn off the M in range flag. So next, the bands high function. And so this is calling the bands extremum, which we'll see soon. That actually generates an array of values from the Bollinger Band, and in this case it will generate an array of the upper band values, and then it takes a single element from that, which is the M squeeze period -1, and you'll see how this works. Let me just write the bands low first, and then we'll get straight to the extremum. So the bands low makes a very similar call, bands extremum. In this case I'm looking at the lower band and element number 0. Now in bands extremum, first a comment here, I haven't bothered to take care of any case where there aren't enough bars to compute the Bollinger Band, simply because I just don't think that will happen often enough. I haven't bothered to deal with it. If you want to make your code more robust, then you'll check the number of bars available and make sure that they are enough to calculate a Bollinger Band. Here I'm declaring an array of type double, that's the buffer. Now I said MQL5 and MQL4 handle indicators differently. For MQL5 I use the copy buffer statement, passing the handle that we set up earlier, asking for the buffer number, which is passed in here, and that's either going to be the upper band or lower band. Beginning at bar number 1 for squeeze period bars, and that populates the buff array. If it's MQL4, there is no simple copy buffer, so I'm doing an array resize of buffer to the number of bars in M squeeze period, and then I'm setting up a simple loop for int I equals 1, while I is less than or equal to squeeze period I plus, buff I -1. Now remember, I'm starting at number 1. I'm starting at bar number 1, and the buffer array begins at element number 0, so I'm from buff I -1. And here's the function in MetaTrader 4 to get values for Bollinger Bands. Symbol, time frame, cast to an integer, bands period, bands deviation, bands shift, bands applied price, and then the extra arguments for the MetaTrader 4 function, the buffer number gets passed in here, and the bar number that I want the value for. So that's why I have this loop, and I'm populating buffer in a loop because I'm making multiple calls to this function for MetaTrader 4, getting each value here. Now once I have that, I have a buffer of the values, either the high or the low, depending which buffer number was passed in, beginning with bar number 1 up to squeeze period bars, but they are in buffer elements 0 up to squeeze period -1. That's not actually too important, because what I do then is this array sort buffer. Now I don't care when the Bollinger Bands hit the high or the low, I just want to know what the high or the low was. So I'm sorting that buffer, and that simply gives me all of the values of the Bollinger Band, either the upper or the lower, sorted in order. And then I return buffer index. So if we go back to these calls, when I called bands high and bands low, in this case I asked for the value from squeeze period -1, and in this case I asked for the value from 0. And that gives me, well, 0 will be the lowest because I'm sorting the array, and squeeze period -1 will be the highest value because I'm sorting the array. So I don't need to worry in this bands extremum function whether I'm looking at the high or the low, because I'm simply returning a single value. And that takes care of everything for the expert. Now let me just make sure, if I go back to Bollinger Bands Squeeze MQ5, I can compile that. And I'll just have to switch to the MetaTrader 4 editor to compile the Bollinger Squeeze MQ4. Now this is the MQL4 editor. And I have opened the .mq4 file here, and that also compiled. Now I'm in the strategy tester here, and I've seen a consolidation of the Bollinger Bands. Just for the demonstration, because I don't want to wait too long, I've actually set the width of the range to 500 points, and I'm only looking for 5 bars in the Bollinger to be in that contracted range. So what I've got here is a box that's been drawn around the range that formed, So this box covers 5 periods. And remember, it's outside the Bollinger Bands because I'm saying that the size of that box depends on the range size that I specified, not the width of the Bollinger. But the Bollinger is staying within that box. So if I look at, that's the highest point in the Bollinger within that range, and this looks like the lowest point. And so the range has centered itself around the midpoint between these two. And at this bar, I've now closed, or rather this bar has closed outside that range. And so that's triggered a buy trade at the beginning of the next bar. And so that is the Bollinger Squeeze Expert. You will need the framework if you want to download this. So the Bollinger Squeeze is available on GitHub, and the framework is also available on GitHub as a separate repo. There will be links in the description and on our website for that. If you found this useful, please leave a like, and if you want to see more of our videos, remember to click subscribe and then click the bell icon to be notified when we release the next video. Thank you for watching.